There we go.
Okay. So my name's Edward Vargas, and I'm a senior at UIC under the major of DHD, which is Disability and Human Development. And so I want to start off by asking you what your name is, and that way you can tell me more about yourself and what you do.
Sure. My name is Justin Cooper. I am a disability artist. I am also a disability advocate and activist as well.
So you mentioned that you were an activist. How long have you been an activist in the disability community?
Well, I've been an activist for close to 8 years now. So started really being actively involved in like disability rights and disability activism back in 2014. And from there, it's kind of like been, a part of who I am as a person. And, it's really something that, I am proud of being called a disability activist. That's something that is, I really take pride in.
Okay, so that's a long time, 8 years to be dedicated to pretty much bringing awareness to other people who are disabled.
Hmm.
And one thing I want to ask you is what communities do you connect to or identify with within the community?
Within the disability community, you know, primarily I'm an artist, and I've really had a lot of, connection with a lot of disabled artists, during my like 8 year journey in focusing on disability rights and and activism. I'm also like highly involved in a strong disabled Black community, which has been something that has really been like beneficial, to me, over the past 8 years, being involved in. And so for me, everything that I've really done as an activist has really been centered, you know, around like really doing stuff for people of color in the disability community, doing a lot of work that, benefits a lot of our folks in the community, and then transitioning that from, activism and combining that with the artistic side. And that's been something that has really been beneficial for me, as an artist, doing photography work that's focused on a lot of different disability issues, and really just taking all of those things and really combining it into like who I am today.
Okay, so you mentioned before that you're an artist. Can I ask you like what type of art do you do?
So I actually started, I became an artist about around 2012. I became an artist, primarily focused on like filmmaking. And so one of the first projects that I did was a documentary called the Wheelchair Chronicles. And that was about pretty much about my life in a wheelchair. And, that was something that really, that film really got me into like disability activism and really being a part of the disability community. That film really helped, guide me, in the early years of like doing this activism work. And now it's really transformed into stuff that I'm doing now as a photographer, really focusing on a lot of issues that, disability related issues that, affect our community, and really showcasing that, and really, you know, putting eyes to a lot of the issues that oftentimes, people don't know or don't understand, and really putting it on, at the forefront of people's eyes, and bringing attention to a lot of those issues.
Okay, so since you're a member of the disability community, do you mind sharing more about your disability?
Oh yeah, sure, sure. So, for me, when growing up, I had cerebral palsy. So, for many years, growing up, that was something that I knew that I had, primarily cerebral palsy. For pretty much the first 30 years of my life, I thought that's what I had until I found out when I was 30 that I was actually misdiagnosed. And so instead of having cerebral palsy, I was actually diagnosed with Becker's muscular dystrophy, which is a more like a genetic disease. And that for me was something that was a shock. For me, you live, you think that you're living with a disability, for one disability all your life, and then you find out, in your 30s that, oh, hey, no, that's not your disability. You're actually diagnosed with this disability. And so there was a lot of things that I had to, realize as now a person who has muscular dystrophy, of just really learning like about what it is and learning about, how it affects, how it affects my body, how it affects my heart, and how it affects a lot of different things that, go on in my body. So, learning that, for a decade, I've had it, for a decade now. I've been diagnosed with muscular dystrophy for a decade now. And so it's taken me some time to understand what I have. And it was just it was very shocking to me because, knowing like the first 30 years of your life, you have, cerebral palsy, and come to find out that's not the case.
Okay, that's a pretty shocking story.
Yeah.
To go from cerebral palsy to being told, no, you got this instead. And from you learning that you had muscular dystrophy, from you changing your daily living of being told that you had cerebral palsy, how much change in your daily life did change from going from being diagnosed with cerebral palsy to dystrophy? Like what changed after that?
I think what changed for me is kind of the knowledge, the knowledge I had about, muscular dystrophy. It really, over the past decade, I've been learning a lot about muscular dystrophy. Especially the one that I have, which is Becker's, and how that genetic disease is slowly, like, you're slowly losing muscle in your body, and learning more about how that affects everything, that I do, how it affects like how I get in my chair, or like how I'm able to move around. And like for me, I have I have my family has an issue, has an issue, when it comes to like heart stuff. And so, I learned that how that muscular dystrophy affects my heart, and how my heart operates, now knowing that I have this. And so I'm more aware of like, I'm more aware of what I have. I'm more aware of like what muscular dystrophy is, compared to cerebral palsy, where I didn't have a better understanding of it. But, like looking back at my childhood, like it makes perfect sense that, a lot of the things that happened, over time as I grew up was because of the effects of muscular dystrophy, and not because of the effects of cerebral palsy, because like obviously they're completely separate disabilities. But, as I got older and looking back at, my childhood, it made perfect sense as to, okay, this is what I have, and I can see the process of how like this has affected my body. And so the knowledge and being able to learn more about what I have, and learning, okay, what can I do to at least slow down the process? Obviously, I can't stop it, but what can I do to at least slow down the process?
Yeah. Do you feel that that people should know more about, like in people in the medical field and just like overall people? Do you feel that they should like learn more about muscular dystrophy more so they could understand people who have it?
Oh yeah, I think there should be more, knowledge that comes, that comes with that. And I also feel like in the medical profession, just because, someone has muscular dystrophy, is not, it doesn't, it affects people with disabilities in completely different ways. So it's not just, okay, well, if I have muscular dystrophy and, you know, my body reacts with in this way, that doesn't mean that another person that might have that also has muscular dystrophy is that it's going to affect us in completely different ways. And so I feel like that's something that I think we should always be, take into account when it comes to, like, disabilities and those things, is that, just because one person has it, doesn't mean that's like a generalization for like everyone when it comes to those disabilities. And so, just that process of learning more about, people with disabilities and learning more about, those type of things, I think it would be really, beneficial.
Okay, that's pretty strong statement. Uh, Obviously there's like advantages and disadvantages of being disabled. What do you feel like is the advantage of being disabled? If 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 you could list some of them.
Well, I think one one advantage, I think, is like really being a part of the being a part of the disability community. I think that's something that has been a huge advantage, for me, being able to interact with so many like different, activists in the field that are fighting for a whole bunch of different stuff, whether it's like, affordable housing, transportation, accessibility issues. There's a lot of people that are out there, fighting for the rights of people with disabilities. And so to me, that's been an advantage, is just learning, being a part of that community and learning a lot more about myself. And that's something that has been very beneficial, for me. And I see that as an advantage.
Uh, do you mind listing some of the disadvantages of disability?
I think one of the disadvantages is, I think a lot of people don't have empathy when it comes to, like, disability issues, or coming, or a lack of empathy when it comes to like accessibility issues, and how these affect people with disabilities. And one of the things that I've been learning, over time, is like, especially when it comes to like accessibility, I think, we've been fighting, not just for like physical accessibility, but like, access for, people who are deaf or hard of hearing, access for people who are visually impaired, folks who rely on ASL and interpretation, those who like use English as a second, using Spanish language interpretation, excuse me. um, Learning that there's a lot more that comes to like dealing with accessibility issues. And that's sort of something that I'm working with at the moment through, my photography work. But just thinking about, a lot of disadvantages is that a lot of people, really don't take into account accessibility, and they feel like that, that's not important, or making places that are, accessible for like everyone in the community. And I think that's something that I don't really see a lot of. And I think it's sort of it's upsetting, because you just see like how people don't care. And sometimes I'm just like, it's just frustrating to see it all the time. And there's a lot of like other things that, that's just an example. I think, there's a lot of other things that come when you're talking about disadvantages, but just from what I've seen is how we don't really take in, accessibility, accommodations, really at this time, especially during this time, we don't really take those into consideration.
Okay, since you identify as a person of color who is disabled, uh, what do you feel like it's like being a person who is disabled and a person of color in the disability community?
I think for me, it's a struggle. I think it's a huge struggle because not only are you a person of color, but you're also like a person with a disability, and oftentimes when it comes to like accessibility issues or when it comes to issues that affect like people of color who are disabled, oftentimes their voices are drowned out by their white counterparts. And that's something that's very frustrating to me when when you see an issue that clearly affects a certain group of a certain group in the community, and their voices are not being heard. That's something that's very frustrating to me oftentimes, as a person of color, because there are some awesome like Black disabled artists, Latino disabled artists, Asian disabled artists that are all out here, and also doing like not just disabled artists but also disabled activists who are really doing some awesome things out here, and oftentimes their voices are drowned out, and it's very frustrating to see. But that doesn't stop us from like, hey, raising our voices, when especially when it comes to issues that affect us. And I think it's something that I really love, to be honest with you, that I love seeing. I love seeing that even despite like constantly being ignored in our community, you know, their voices, people of color, their voices are being heard in this community, and more people of color need to have their voices heard, coming from our community.
Uh, how has being disabled influenced your community of color, like the relationships?
I think more that I've met more Black disabled. I've met more Black disabled folks, over the years, and for me, it's kind of that connection. We kind of like, even though we're all come from different backgrounds, like when it comes to certain issues that affect our community, we get it, and it's like, oh, we understand each other, that we're on the same page when it comes to those type of issues. And so for me, being part of that specific community has been very valuable for me in learning that, oh, there's other people who look like me that are who understand what I'm going through, and who understand like, hey, we're in this together, let's figure this out, let's work this out, and coming together to fight a common cause in the disability community. That's something that for me I'm grateful for, and has been very beneficial, to learning from other folks within the community, other Black disabled folks in the community, and learning a lot from them, and taking what I've learned from them and putting it and incorporating it in the work that I do.
Yeah, I get you. Uh, how does your community of color view disability?
That's an interesting interesting question. I, I I feel like within the community, there's some that are that really embrace, disabled, the Black disabled folks. They've really been like, very supportive, but then also like sometimes there's not a lot of support, and so oftentimes, we in the, as a Black disabled person, sometimes I look to other folks who are disabled, other, Black folks who are disabled, as like my friends and family, so sometimes it's a struggle when sometimes even in our community, where, we're raising concerns and issues, and sometimes even in our own communities, we're often shunned or not heard, or, or our voices are not heard in certain situations. And so sometimes it's frustrating. It's frustrating when sometimes even in your own community, you don't get that same support. You don't have that support system, from non-disabled, from non-disabled folks in your community. That could be frustrating. And it's something that, you know, I've learned to, like, hey, I know that there are people in the community that I see as family, and that I can always talk to or always come to whenever there's an issue that arises, and knowing that I have their support. And yeah, that's something that I've just really have taken, and just like, hey, this is something that I know that there's a lot of people within the community that are disappointed, that we don't have that same support. But I feel like, as Black disabled folks or people of color, like we've learned to be our own. We've learned to support each other within the community, and I think that's something that, like I said earlier, is like really something I'm grateful for, and it's really beneficial to me.
Okay. Do you mind talking about your journey from learning you're disabled to the point you're at now?
Well, like for me, I didn't grow up a lot. I really didn't grow up a lot around a lot of like disabled folks growing up. So I didn't know about a disabled community. I didn't know about, the disability rights movement, or about, about the ADA, or a lot of these different things. I didn't really learn about a lot of those things until recent. So it's really until I got into this community, in the community, maybe 8 years ago, about, learning about a lot of the different issues. When I did like the Wheelchair Chronicles, that was like, I tell people that was like sort of like before I got like being a part of the community and learning a lot about the issues. And so, for me, I didn't know, like I said, I didn't know a lot of folks in the community. So it's like most recent, like as of when I first started being a part of the community, I was learning more about a lot of the issues and a lot of the things that were really affecting us. And so, yeah, not having that like experience growing up, like it wasn't, I didn't really think about it, to be honest with you. I didn't really think about, oh, well, I don't have no disabled friends, or I don't know any disabled folks. Mostly it was just me. And mostly I was the only like disabled person like in the group. So, like I said, like just it's been about 8 years. I've been almost, been an activist for 8 years. But yeah, that's when I started being a part of the community. So it actually took to being like a full grown, like almost close to 40, or no, well, yeah, no, yeah, I'm almost 40 now, but it took like a decade for like to figure it all out, to be a part of, to be a part of the community. And so yeah, it's been an interesting journey.
Yeah. I've heard you talk about or mention your movie, the Wheelchair Chronicles. Do you mind talking a little bit more about it? Because I want to hear more about it. What is it about?
Sure. So I did the Wheelchair Chronicles. I started it in February of 2012. I was a student at DePaul at the time, and I was, wondering, I was really like focused on like media representation at the time. And so I wasn't seeing like a lot of people who looked like me, you know, sharing their stories. And oftentimes when disabled folks, when their stories were being shared, it was shared from a non-disabled perspective. And so, that was sort of a motivation for me to like, instead of like, why not share my story? Why not, talk about my life in a wheelchair and being disabled? And so, yeah, that's kind of the premise of the Wheelchair Chronicles. It was like, I started it in 2012. I did like a little interview in 2013. And in between, I had shot like tons of footage of my travels across the city. And so, that film was really just focused on, my life in a wheelchair, talking about growing up as a disabled person. And it was really just an interesting journey, into like what I'm doing now as a photographer and really sharing stories. So, really storytelling and really sharing the stories of people with disabilities. And yeah, the Wheelchair Chronicles really catapulted me into the disability community and, becoming like the artist that I am today.
Okay, what do you feel like what unique challenges have you experienced being a person of disability and who is also a person of color? Like, what challenges have you faced?
What challenges have I faced? Oh, yeah, it is, there's a lot of challenges that I've faced, especially when it comes to like really, you know, especially like dealing with like accessibility, and oftentimes in just actually just dealing with like accessibility issues. That's something that I think has also been a challenge for me, even though I live in a very good community where I'm able to get around and able to like maneuver in my chair and do all of these things. There have been challenges where I've had to deal with like transportation issues. I've had to deal with like the lack of access, like the lack of like physical access, the lack of accommodations, growing up in college and all of these different things. But I've learned a lot from those challenges and really like being a part, like I said, being a part of the community, learning about those challenges and seeing how can we change, what we see and how do we change, you know, what how policies work and what can we do to make change in our communities. And so those challenges have really presented itself a lot, especially as I've gotten older. But I've learned to like, okay, what can I do to change? Yeah, what can I do to make an impact on like, those challenges and how I can like turn it into something that's positive or turn it into something that, gets results, especially when it comes to like, dealing with accessibility.
Okay, how inclusive do you feel disability culture is of your experience being a POC with a disability?
Hmm. That's a good question. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, how inclusive do you feel disability culture is of your experience being a POC with a disability?
Hmm. That's hmm. Let's see. That's a good question. That's a good question. What do you mean by like being inclusive?
Like, do you feel like that like you're included within the disability culture? If
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, I had
yeah,
to I had to think about that for a second. But yeah, I think I've for me, like being in the community has really opened up a lot of doors for me. And over the years, like especially in the art field, you know, it's given me a space where I can, I'm a part of this community that I'm included in the community, especially doing that type of work, especially over the last like few years, just really interacting with other people of color, other artists, other disabled artists who are people of color, and really learning a lot from them and their experiences in that field, and learning a lot more about myself as an artist, through them. And, combining that with like the work I do as an activist, having, it's been inclusive for me. And like, I having the space to really, express myself and showcase, what I do, it's something that I'm really grateful for, and it's like been a like really been a big part of my growth as an artist and as a person.
Okay, what would you want to what would you want someone to, who doesn't know about disability, what would you want them to know about you?
Now, what I would want them to know is that, we're people first. I think oftentimes, people, when, I think non-disabled folks look at people with disabilities, they don't see that, we're actual people, that we could actually do things and that we can actually, be a part of society. Oftentimes, people try to shun away people with disabilities. They try to ignore a lot of the issues with people with disabilities and think that it's not going to, like, oh, well, they're disabled, I have no issue with, I like, they're disabled, that I ain't got nothing to do with that, and that doesn't affect me. And I think one of the things I think I want people to know is that, a lot of the issues that people with disabilities are fighting for, that's really for future generations. Because one of the things I've always heard from friends within the community is like, yeah, as you get older, yeah, you're going to become a part of this community. And so it's important to listen to a lot of the people with the, disabilities. Understand that, yes, we are people. Like, hey, we're human, and hey, we have we have a lot of issues that are happening within the community that's going to affect a lot of folks. And so I think it's very important to just listen to a lot of the people in the community and have a better understanding of what we're dealing with and what we're going through, because it's a struggle. Being disabled it's a struggle. It's not always great. It's not always, I'm a positive person, but even I, after a certain point, have a breaking point where I'm just like, it's frustrating. And so I want people to recognize that, hey, we're here, we're people too. And hey, it's important to get, to fight for these issues with us, because yeah, a lot of people are going to, like I said, a lot of people are gonna get older, they're going to be disabled, or they're going to be disabled in one way or another. And so it's important to be a part of the, support the community now, and not have to continue to fight for these same issues, later on.
What do you feel a good piece of advice would you give to someone who is young and with who is young and has a similar background to you?
What I would tell, like, what I would say is, growing up as a person who's like now, like, as an artist, I think it's important is that, for younger folks, including younger generations, to know that their voices matter, that whether you're doing stuff as an activist or whether you're doing stuff as an artist, and it's just that your voice in the community matters, and your voice on a lot of issues that are coming up matters. And so it's important, that you continue to grow, and and continue to fight, because I think that's one of the things that a lot of us have had to do for years and generations, and decades of trying to just fighting systems and changing systems, and understanding that you have a community of people who support you, and you're not in this by yourself, and that there are other people that are badasses just like you. And yeah, just keep fighting, and making sure that your voice matters, or making sure that your work, like whatever you do, that make sure that it counts. Make sure that it counts, so that we can continue, so future generations can continue to fight and continue to do the things that they love and that they're passionate about.
Okay, since the time that you've been an advocate, what change do you hope to see through your impact within the community?
Well, I think one of the things I'm really like wanting to see is, like, now that I'm at a point where I want people to learn more about the disability community, that I want people to learn more about a lot of disability issues. And, I want them to see, from my perspective, what we have to go through on a daily basis for, in order to live, in order to have access, and I just want people to just, remember me as a person that just was someone that was, wanting to, that was like a person that wanted, that, fought for a lot of, fought for the rights of people with disabilities, through, my photography work, and, you know, and sharing the stories of like who we are as people. I think that's what I would want people to remember me for.